So next, I would like to invite up to the stage and introduce our first panel discussion that Rachel did a wonderful job setting up all three of our panels. The first panel here being Decarbonizing Community Transportation. So like I said, moving people, moving things, moving equitably. These are the three themes that we have today. So we have a wonderful panel of folks today, starting with Lauren Harper, who is the director of the Sustainable Cities at the Los Angeles Cleantech Incubator. We have Qian, who is a professor in our Civil and Environmental Engineering department here at CMU. Amy Silberman, who is here representing Pittsburgh Regional Transit. Erin Russell-Story with the Clean Cities Regional, she's a Clean Cities Regional Manager with the National Energy Technology Laboratory. Jenn, who is also a CMU alum, but now is at UC Davis, directing the Institute for Transportation Studies. And last but not least, our great moderator this morning, Lightman, who is the Executive Director of Metro 21 and Safety 21. So please, first of all, thank you so much for being here. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Great, thank you. Welcome. Hi, everybody. It's great to be with you today. So as Daniel was saying, that we're about moving people. And so we want to talk about not just moving people, but doing it in a way that's equitable, which we'll talk about at another panel later today, sustainable, so decarbonization, maybe we can try to save the planet, and efficient, right? So and you think about the way our roadways, infrastructure, it's all been focused on moving things efficiently, historically, as fast, as quickly as possible, not really thinking about the humans that are behind, that maybe the vulnerable road users, the people on the street, people on the bus. I won't start singing any Taylor Swift songs, but I'm sure there's a Taylor Swift song about that. So today we're gonna talk about that. My goal is that you don't have to pick one. It's not just efficient, it's not just sustainable, it's just not just equitable, but how about all three? So that's what we're gonna do today in our panel. And with that, I'm gonna let each of our panelists do a quick 1-2 minute introduction of themselves, and then we're going to get to questions, and then think of questions you want to ask these guys. This is a powerhouse panel. This one right here, I imported all the way from LA to be with us today. So think of your questions, and we're thrilled to be here. And with that, Lauren, please.
Thank you, Karen. My name is Lauren Harper. I am the Director of Sustainable Studies at the Los Angeles Cleantech Incubator. Our mission at LACY is to create an inclusive green economy. So we obviously are an incubator, so we help startup entrepreneurs work to scale their clean technology. But I sit on the market transformation team, which we look at policy, we look at pilots, and we look at public-private partnerships to figure out how can we take that clean technology and really inject it into the market so that we can have these technologies through pilot demonstrations become something that is part of the fabric of our community. So I have a background in conservation, and then I've moved into the sustainability side, and I get to touch all the different sides of energy, transportation, and then waste streams and working to reduce waste in Los Angeles. So
awesome, great. Thrilled to have you here. We'll go down the line, and then I'm gonna mix it up. So go for it, Amy.
All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Amy Silberman. I am the Chief Development Officer at Pittsburgh Regional Transit here in Allegheny County. So PRT is, as many of you who are local know, our public transportation authority here. We move about 100,000 people or trips every day, every weekday in the region, across about 100 different routes, both bus, light rail, and incline, as well as paratransit. So sort of by nature, our reason for being is about moving people efficiently, sustainably, and equitably. We are also moving into the space of electrification and other types of zero-emission fuels, which we'll talk more about throughout the panel. So I personally oversee for PRT our engineering groups, our planning group, our scheduling group, which also has lots of tie-ins for today, and our transit amenities, so stops, shelters, park and rides, as well as paratransit. And then bringing it really close to home, I'm also an alum of CMU. I got my Master's of Science in Public Policy and Management here a few years back, so I'm very happy to be here today and happy for Karen for inviting me.
Awesome. Yeah, we're thrilled to have you with us today. And Alan, you're making a reappearance back to your alma mater. And also, can you tell us about your cute hat?
Yes, maybe I'll touch into that on my quick intro. So I'm Mellon Jenn. I'm a professor at UC Davis, hence the hat, and in civil and environmental engineering. I did my doctorate here at Carnegie Mellon in engineering and public policy a decade ago. And kind of really following in that spirit, one of the places that I'm most involved with at UC Davis is the Institute of Transportation Studies. It's one of the largest sustainable transportation institutes in the country, and our proximity to Sacramento kind of lets us work very closely with policymakers. And so we're sort of intimately integrating our research into policymaking, both with legislature in California and with regulatory agencies. So that's been a very sort of satisfying, elongation of kind of the spirit of what EPP does here at Carnegie Mellon. My research mainly focuses on the integration of electric vehicles and the grid, but our research center, the Electric Vehicle Research Center, does pretty much everything related to EVs, and so I'll be speaking a little bit about that today.
Awesome, great. Sean.
Good morning. My name is Sean Qian. I'm a professor of transportation systems. I have a joint appointment at the CMU. I have a joint appointment at the civil and the environmental engineering, also as well as in the Heinz College of Public Policy and Information System Management. The name is too long. So my passion is networks and data. I am super interested in understanding in a very large-scale networks of transportation or grid or pipelines or services and how people behave. Why would people making different choices in the context of networks? So-called the system approach, understanding whatever is happening, disruption or extreme events or policies, tolling, electrification. What's the implications to the entire system? Again, not just the roadway system, but also cutting across different modes of transportation, public transit, parking, mobility services, and other utilities and grid. And so and then the most important thing is that I believe that it's very important to leverage data now because we have so many data, not just the volume, but also different sources, different sectors providing us different sensing system, giving us different data. How can we leverage data to understand the behavior so we can make a system level decision? I have another role, which is, I think it's also very relevant to CMU's Energy Week. I run a very small, tiny business. It's a CMU spin out. It's called Traffic Cure. Again, the goal is try to commercialize a lot of technologies that we did in the past decade at CMU, try to commercialize these technologies and put it into practice. I would love to talk to more about this. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for doing that plug for Traffic Cure. Cure with a Q. Okay. If you're
Thank
Googling
you.
it. Yeah.
You know me the best.
Yeah. Erin.
Thank you. I'm Erin Russell-Story. I'm very happy to be here today. I'm from the National Energy Technology Laboratory, just a few miles south of here, around South Park. I'm with the Clean Cities program. Actually, we've been around for 30 years with the Department of Energy. Our goal is to promote the use of alternative fuel vehicles. And after 30 years, we just did a rebranding. We are actually now Clean Cities and Communities. I'll tell you that I've been involved with the program since 1997. I started on the ground as a Clean Cities coordinator in Northeast Ohio, and I will be completely honest, saying Clean Cities and Communities doesn't automatically roll off my tongue after 27 years of saying something different. And we actually, in Clean Cities, we work with stakeholders all around the country. We have 75 coalitions that represent about 90% of the population of the country, and we have stakeholders. We have in the neighborhood of, I think, about 20,000 stakeholders in those coalitions, and we help fleets, municipalities, and other agencies and entities transition to alternative fuel vehicles. And right now, with the rest of the Department of Energy, we're really focused on transportation decarbonization.
Great. All right. Well, as you can see, amazing panel. Think of your questions for a few, maybe 25 minutes from now. We'll start that. And one of the threads I want to pull on that you've heard from folks is not just the technology, not just implementation, but and funding is probably something we should talk about too, right? Someone's got to pay for this, but it's the policy aspect. And so with that, I want to go to you, Lauren, a project that you and Sean and I have been working on for 2.5, almost 3 years, is actually a project based on some work that Costa, who is not here, I was going to totally, is he there? No. All right, Costa. Costa Samaras, as well as Sean did, with this idea of almost like an Airbnb for the curb. You think of the curb, and this is before the pandemic, when and now that we have like all these different UPS, Amazon, FedEx, and the Postal Service all using the curb, Uber Eats, et cetera. And so how do we optimize the use of curb and smart loading zones? So we've done a demonstration project here in combination with our friends at Lacey, funded by the Department of Energy Vehicle Technology Office. And so with that question, thinking about the policy, thinking about the technology, can you speak a little bit about those innovative policy frameworks of how do you use that to create smart loading zones with a focus on also zero emissions and in an urban environment, and thinking of also issues such as privacy, equity, and the impact on different types of transportation, like multimodal, like what Sean was talking about. Lauren, go for it.
Yeah. So one of the things when you think about policy is you really want to use it as a guide framework of like, where do we want to go? What are our outcomes? And so when we do a lot of different pilots at Lacey, we're always thinking about what do we want the end user to feel? What are the takeaways? What are we doing post-pilot? Because that's really going to drive how we create that impact. And so one of the things we've learned in this project is you can have the technology and you have human behavior, and people will change their human behavior based off of the policies that you work to implement. So how do you really make sure that when you're creating that and putting that together, how does the policy actually work with the ecosystem that's already taking place? Right. And how does the technology really leverage or also provide accessibility and access to everyone? Because if you're excluded by a policy or excluded by a technology, you're not going to participate. And so really thinking through how can you have an impact? How can you make sure that all the participants can play in? Is there a feedback loop opportunity so that you can better understand exactly what is and isn't working? And we've learned a lot about the project here, and we've had to stop and start again, but I'm really proud of the work that we've done to really find out what is going to help the community take the slow step, put the toe in the water to start moving forward, of how we leverage having better use of the curb, better turnover. If you're just trying to pick up your salad so that you can run back to the office and get lunch, or if you're trying to get that delivered, how do we make that most efficient? So we also know that in working to convert and decarbonize transportation in the delivery space, we're also reducing the amount of energy being used at the curb with reduction in idling, but also reduction in greenhouse gas emissions in that point source place. And so Pittsburgh is an amazing city because you guys are ahead of LA, and it's always something I'm very proud of.
We're ahead
every
of LA.
time we meet. And
that's the headline from today's conference, ahead of LA.
Yeah, and we're gonna meet tomorrow.
Yes.
For this project, and so I'm really excited to hear about some of the policy updates. But I'll add one more thing, which is in our project, what we've also worked to do is figure out how do we create a policy guideline so that we can also not only help the city of Pittsburgh when we were first starting, but also help the city of LA, Santa Monica, and other cities for that matter, figure out how do they make sure that they're thinking about policy, how do they think about privacy and personal identifiable information for what we're using, and how do we make sure that there's equity so that we're not putting equity last, but we make sure that it's threaded throughout. So what are we thinking about rates, accessibility, things like that.
Yeah, the community piece is so critical. That's the role that I played in this project, was working with the business improvement districts who were incentivized and wanted to see more efficiency, but that connection to community, like the people who are actually driving, is really critical. Anybody else want to say, Sean, do you want to add anything to that? Maybe on the data side? You're good.
I can probably speak to some of the technology perspective of the curbside project. Again, going back to the data, that we typically don't know much about what's happening on the curb spaces yet. I mean, there are technologies. But through this project, we are getting from some of the local technological companies support, and we have some understanding of what type of vehicle, for how much time they stop and pick up how many passengers and loading, unloading, what type of commodity in general. We have a whole lot of information about understanding the behavior aspect of it, right? Therefore, and then we, it's what's happening on the curb spaces, not just the curb spaces. Again, we suspect to where they're originally coming from, why are they delivering to what customer. So again, we're not really necessarily tracking every single vehicle or people, but in general sense, in the curb space, at the system level, at the street level, we have some understanding why, when, how, and then we can impose some of the policies, and this through network system level computation. Of course, part of the computation is then we can understand the energy implications of pricing or allocating specific spaces for pickup or drop-offs, which I think this is really the focus of this project, is to understand the energy implication and what policy can we use to reduce the energy consumption. And part of it, again, is about, I think, going back to the community, this technology not necessarily not controversial, right? So everyone, different stakeholders, different community people, they have different needs, and they might like or doesn't like this technology. I think what we do is try to look at the options and try to discuss and be very transparent and having open dialogue and discussion with different community stakeholders and researchers, of course, in this case, and Lacey, and try to find a good balance of improving efficiency and also making sure everyone gets satisfy everyone's needs.
Right. So, and trying to get to that all three, not just one, the efficiency piece. So we're going to do a little pivot. We're going to talk about transportation fleets and buses and trying to move more people. I think my friend Chris Sandvig will talk a little bit later about when you talk about electrification, do we really want to have single occupancy vehicles, more single occupancy vehicles on the road that are electrified? Is that really what we're trying for? We want to see like more use of things like public transportation where you're moving lots more people more efficiently. I'm sure Chris will talk about that later. So with that, Amy, how do we get to that transitioning to a zero emission fleet beyond cost?
Let me start by just backing us all up so we're level set with sort of what PRT has and what we've committed to and what we're doing with regard to our fleet. So we have about 700 buses. 8 of them right now, actually 9 of them right now are battery electric buses. So we're 1% there. We committed back in 2021 to moving to a completely zero emission fleet by 2025. That was part of our long range transportation plan, which is called Next Transit. So at that point, we started working with our fleet teams on developing a transition plan for moving toward zero emission fleet. Right now, we are focusing that transition plan on electric. We have also had conversations about hydrogen. We have not advanced any of those yet. But we do have 8 battery electric buses right now. They've been in operation for a few years now. They're working. They're working well. And we have tested them on many different routes. So you've probably seen them if you're a Pittsburgher here out and about. We just received our first 60-foot, which are the bendy, longer buses. We just received our first 60-foot battery electric bus a couple weeks ago. So we're very excited about that. We have 14 more coming in over the next quarter. And those will actually run here in the Oakland corridor. So we'll be 3% there by the end of this year, but there's a long way to go. These buses are significantly more expensive than clean diesel buses, which is our traditional fueling technology that the other 97% of our buses operate with. And in addition to cost, so cost is one huge challenge, and I didn't want to get overly burdened today talking about cost because it doesn't have a simple or quick solution. There are many things out there that we are pursuing. There are many things that the federal and more local governments are doing to try and support this transition that I know we heard some about earlier today, and I'm sure we'll hear more about. But I wanted to talk more about sort of the nitty-gritty of what changes for us when we change a fueling type or an energy type on our vehicles. So these battery electric buses need to charge. Our system is optimized right now and has been built around buses that can stay out for 20 plus hours of the day. They do not need to be refueled all day long. They can go out at 4 a.m. and run until midnight or after, and they can stay out that entire time. So thinking through charging and how these buses charge, where these buses charge, how long these buses charge has very significant implications for how we schedule our vehicles, how we schedule our workforce and our bus operators, and how they drive those vehicles, how they move from one vehicle to another, and what infrastructure we own and are therefore able to build out charging infrastructure on or partner with other entities to build that charging infrastructure on. So right now our charging takes place at our East Liberty division. We're also building out some charging near Wilkinsburg Station on the East Busway. We're working with Qian Light on some of those projects, which is a great partnership. But we have a lot of layovers, which are places where our bus routes end, that are in a parking lot of a shopping plaza or behind some private building on the side of a street. We do not own this property. We, in many cases, have verbal agreements, not even written agreements, to be able to use private property to let our buses sit, let our bus operators get out and use a quick restroom break before they get back up and running. So there are very long time frame implications for the infrastructure build out that is needed here, in addition to the how do we pay for all of it question. So that's mostly what I wanted to kind of touch on today, is that this isn't as simple as, oh, let's just find $300 million extra dollars and then great, PRT will be fully electrified. This is something that all of our transit agencies are really struggling with. Many of us are moving towards at least already having commitments for moving to zero emission fleets, but many of us are asking that same question, both of how do we pay for it and how do we actually schedule and operate it, given that these contexts in which we run, we usually do not own our property and our infrastructure at the ends of our lines. So cost is a big question, I think, for all of us, regardless of what we're thinking about with decarbonizing transportation. But I think infrastructure is just as big of a question mark for us as we move along the spectrum too.
Right, and that collaborative aspect to it, that community aspect is another, the people piece of it. So with that, let's talk about human behavior. Let's talk about how do we move people to think about more environmentally friendly, sustainable mobility options. So Sean, given your research, what are your thoughts on how we encourage folks to shift to more climate-friendly, multimodal, intermodal options?
Yeah, I try to make it very sure that. Again, I probably want to start by quoting the US DOT's most recent blueprint. I think they listed, again, transportation decarbonization is a very broad topic. It's way more than just the 3 items they listed as some of the priorities. One is system level approach, which I briefly touched on. The second is leveraging mode shift. I think this is more of a how can we encourage people to shift it to, instead of driving, solo driving, to more environmentally friendly modes of transportation, right? Such as taking public transit. But public transportation, as Amy knows, that there's a lot of, everyone knows that there's a lot of challenges of public transportation services. Well, number 3 is using the fuel efficient vehicles and fuels. And so very quickly on the mode shift, I think this is again big challenge in both in the city as well in the rural, because traditional public transportation service is a fixed route, fixed schedule. It's very costly to run. These very large articulated buses, and then the coverage is very limited, right? The bus comes every 15 minutes, 20 minutes at its best. It's also half mile, a quarter mile apart, and then this is not necessarily a door-to-door convenient, low-cost service. So how can we encourage people? A lot of it is about the habit, but a lot of it is about the cost, convenience, safety, reliability. There are many factors that influence our decision of which mode of transportation we use. So some of the ideas that we have is, now we have the new technologies, the communication technologies, right? People know more information about when bus is going to arrive on time. On top of that, we also have other emerging mobility options, such as, people can have different choices of scooters, bikes, and not, scooter is a very controversial issue, but bikes, e-bikes, maybe walking, and giving people more information about how healthy walking or biking could be. There are other options, we talk about right now the micro-mobility, micro-transit. Can we run some small minivan type of shuttle on-demand, efficient circular buses and getting people around, connecting people to hubs, the big bus hubs? So these are some of the ideas, and there's no one-size-fits-all solution, but every community, depending on where the needs are, we might come up with different combinations of modes that might fit their needs. Again, going back to the rural community, that might be an entirely different question. So I think Nicole sits here. So she and I will work on the DOE grant on the rural mobility services, and that's a whole different challenge. How can we encourage people not necessarily driving a vehicle, which likely to be very few low fuel efficient vehicles, and most likely, and very aged vehicle? Can we shift some of these trips to shared mobility services in rural, where they still can access essential resources such as jobs or healthcare, facilities and community services. So these are challenges. We not necessarily have a solution yet, but I think that we're working on it.
That's great things to think about. That it's that interconnectivity. And it's not one size fits all. It also is dependent on the community. And electric vehicles are that shift. I mean, California, we kind of joke the difference. Like somebody said, how many people in the audience have an EV? I think I saw like 5 or 6 hands, like not a lot. It's not, maybe some hybrids, right? We have some plug-in hybrids in the audience, but we don't have as many EVs as say is in California. So Alan, let's talk about it. Let's talk about that shift to EV and some of the challenges from a policy side, given that you're in California, but maybe broadening it to the rest of the country. That'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So, at our institute, we're trying to think, at the cutting edge, what are the next sets of problems? And some of the things that we might be seeing in California, I think will eventually sort of be trickling down to the rest of the country. And so I wanted to talk about a couple of the problems and challenges that we're thinking about. So 3 things. So 1, equity and accessibility, 2, the grid, and 3, charging infrastructure, reliability, and accessibility as well. So the first one, in terms of this challenge of electrification, I think it's no longer a question, especially in California, of whether or not we should do it. And now it's kind of making sure that no one is left behind, right? And so you guys may have heard these headlines, right? In California, no more gas cars by 2035. And then President Biden has this executive order, right? Nationally, 50% sales by 2030. So both of those numbers are specifically for new vehicle sales, right? And so there's this gap between people who are buying new cars and people who are buying used cars, right? And so if there's, let's say, 100 of you here who are in the market for buying a car, right? Let's say you represent the population of car buyers in the US, only 30 of you are going to be buying new cars. The other 70 are going to be buying used cars. And so how do we get to the point where EVs are trickling down and being affordable to that segment of the population? And fortunately, there is some good news there. There's a lot of policies in California and more recent policies, even at the federal level, that are helping to subsidize used vehicles. And so actually just at the beginning of this year, there's been some implementation of part of the Inflation Reduction Act that's kind of opening up used cars and incentives for used cars. And so we are pretty excited about that and trying to keep an eye on what's happening in the EV used car market. And so hopefully there's going to be some new research coming out on that pretty soon. The other thing that we want to think about is not only accessibility in terms of equity, but also the benefits and impacts of that. So one of the things that we're trying to keep an eye on is who's getting affected by some of these benefits, right? So imagine, I'm some rich person in Silicon Valley and I buy a Tesla, right? That's great, okay, in terms of removing local air pollution, right? Maybe I've replaced a BMW or a Mercedes or something, and you take that air pollution off the road, right, by having this zero emission vehicle, but only zero emission from the tailpipe. So when I plug in that car down in San Jose and I start charging, right, a power plant in Bakersfield might be ramping up, right? And so one of the things that we're trying to investigate is understanding the implications of how air quality is shifting as a result of people buying electric vehicles. And that's an important sort of equity piece as well.
Make your final point. That's great.
So the second point that I want to talk about was on the grid. So one of the most common questions that I get asked about in sort of my line of work, is our grid ready for all of these electric vehicles? And I think, so there's a little bit of nuance needed here. In our sort of broader research, we found that actually when you think about power plants and generation, right, is there enough power that can be generated to provide electricity to these vehicles? Actually, it doesn't seem too bad. I think one of the bigger issues is looking at infrastructure on the distribution system. So we think about how power gets to us. That's where we're starting to see some issues. So we've been working closely with a number of California utilities, and there's all these worries about, okay, we got to install all these transformers and upgrade all these circuits. And it's going to cost a lot of money, right? So we're estimating something on the order of $20 billion just in California over the next decade. But it's not all negative, right? So because there's so much electricity demand, that money that people are paying into the system, even accounting for that $20 billion upgrades, is actually going to lower people's electricity bills. So there's this kind of confusing aspect of even though there's going to be a lot of additional infrastructure requirement and a lot of investment needed, the overall demand for electricity is actually driving rates down for electricity ratepayers.
These are great questions also when we think about California, and then when we look at states like Pennsylvania, it's also, the role of the Pennsylvania Utility Commission, right, plays a really important role to allow that. And then the rate hike and the rate impact, short-term, long-term, is also the equity piece. So really, it's good stuff. All right, Erin, let's talk about the role of beyond funding, what organizations like DOE and the Clean Cities and Communities can provide to help moving fleets as well as communities towards electrification and zero emission vehicles.
Well, I just want to say something to Amy's point. We toss around a lot of big numbers in terms of dollars, like, if we just had an extra $30 million. And I just want to say, I want to acknowledge that in and of itself is not easy, right? I mean, we're talking about lots of large-scale dollars. But just like Amy said, money isn't the answer to all of these issues. And that's what we have learned in the Clean Cities and Communities program. Like I said, we've been around for 30 years. We're entering into our 31st year. And over the course of our history, we've provided a lot of technical assistance to fleets. We have tools and calculators and expertise on the ground in those 75 communities that I mentioned, where these coalitions and their stakeholders can help fleets through fleet analysis, do route optimization for their fleets. They can do right sizing for their fleets. They can do right sizing of vehicles, as well as try to provide expertise for that infrastructure planning, because it can be really difficult. We also have the capacity to help authorities having jurisdiction, AHJs, from permitting and code officials. Codes are often a big stumbling block in many communities, as is permitting. Fire, safety, first responder, tow operators, those are also part of the puzzle, and we also have resources for that. I do want to throw out we have several really important websites, but one I think that is really valuable for this conversation, and I'd like everybody to remember, it's pretty easy. It's fueleconomy.gov, and if you haven't been there, I encourage you to visit it. It's a joint effort between the Department of Energy and the EPA, and it has a couple of dozen of calculators on that website and tools, and it can help not only fleets, but also individual buyers shop for fuel-efficient vehicles. It can help you determine what tax incentives, these brand new ones, are available for an electric vehicle or plug-in hybrid that you might want to purchase, and how much that tax incentive would be. It also has a calculator that will help you determine the greenhouse gas impact of your electric or plug-in hybrid vehicle based on your zip code and your specific energy generation. So you don't know until you use the calculator if you'd be better off buying a hybrid, a plug-in hybrid, or an electric vehicle, depending on what your greenhouse gas footprint would be from your electricity generation. So we have a lot of tools and resources. The other website I want everybody to remember is cleancities.energy.gov, and that will take you to all these other websites as well.
That's great, thank you. And I think actually the piece you were talking about, that it's not just the money, but it's also infrastructure. Workforce development is another piece of that. And in fact, Safety 21, the National U.S. Department of Transportation, University Transportation Center that I'm the executive director of, we have two community colleges, one in Philadelphia and one in Allegheny County, CCAC, that have programs to help in mechanics and developing mechanics so that they get the skills and the tools for the future fleet that we're going to have on the roads. Those also need to be fixed. The traffic incident management, the first responders that come to a fire, that's an EV or a EV truck, they're going to need training as well. So that's something that at Safety 21 we're looking, because we're focused on safety, we're looking at those issues. I'd love to open up to some questions in the audience. I hope this has sparked some interest from folks. So if you have a question, I see a hand in the back, a hand here, a hand there, and that's great. So we'll spend the next couple minutes with some audience participation.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you to all the panelists. Just a quick round of applause for the insights thus far. I meant to do this at the previous Q&A, but I wanted to make sure that the first question comes from a student if they're in the room. And oh, here we go. Perfect.
Thank you. Thank you to all the panel speakers. This was really enlightening, actually. So thank you very much. I have a question for the clean cities people here, the city development, because we are in the middle of a real estate crisis. We can all agree on that. And of course, new developments will be needed. So if we can decide how our newer cities and neighborhoods are designed, I think that the trend is to move towards more dense and more transit-oriented developments. And well, this is supposed to phase out individual vehicles. And I see a lot of emphasis on battery-powered vehicles, on EVs, on electric buses, on micromobility, though you have mentioned that. But I want to know your position on rail transportation, on light rail, on even underground metro systems, because the US is a bit behind on this compared to mainly European cities. So I think rail would be a good substitute for electric buses because they move on a fixed route, so it is easier to electrify and you get rid of the hindrance of electric batteries, degradation and stuff. But I would really like to know your opinion on rail transportation towards especially new communities, and who takes the costs of that, because that is a more expensive investment? And well, yes, that will be it. Thank you.
That's great. Great question. Who wants to take that one? Amy. Absolutely.
Great question. I'll just start with the rail piece and maybe put in a little TOD plug as well. So we're building a bus rapid transit project here outside on Forbes Avenue through this corridor. It is about a $300 million project. We did analysis many years ago before selecting bus rapid transit as the mode of choice in this corridor, and determined that would be about a $2 to $3 billion corridor if we were to build something on light rail. So one piece here is light rail, especially in the United States, and I could spend an hour talking about why that is in this country, but is extremely expensive to build. It does have significant benefits. I think it has significant benefits for choice riders who have other options, who may opt to use rail, whereas perhaps they have certain feelings or thoughts about buses and would not use buses, even if they look as much like light rail as they can. And I think there are significant benefits to the permanence of rail with thinking about transit-oriented development, thinking about people being able to build up around rail lines in a way that is more permanent than a bus may ever feel. There is a significant downside to that too. We announced yesterday well over $100 million going into our rail system over the next few years here in Pittsburgh, and that is mostly state of good repair projects. They are very significant projects. When you have to maintain light rail, you cannot kind of just move around it and keep going. So the disruption that can come from rail is also much more significant if there's an incident or even planned work. Buses are much, much more flexible. So we've had that conversation a lot around our busways too, people asking us, hey, these busways are great, why can't you turn them into rail? They're much cheaper to operate, they're much cheaper to build, and they are much more flexible long-term. So if we can continue to focus on why do people like light rail more, and can we apply that to bus so that we can get the benefits of light rail from a much less expensive and more flexible system? I think that is sort of generally where our focus has been. We will continue to look at rail in our long-range plan. We have a few corridors that we will specifically look at rail for other reasons, and we always will, but we are continuing to move down the spectrum of rail becoming more and more and more expensive to build for a variety of reasons, and bus in many cities, bus rapid transit type solutions becoming more and more the solution, and trying to apply those rail benefits to bus.
I'm not surprised, actually, that that issue, but it saddens me because I do love light rail. I also want to throw one word out there, gondolas. I'd love to see, hilly cities like Pittsburgh. Yes, can we have gondolas? Okay, question.
Yep.
Right.
Sure. I'm curious if you've mentioned the issue of cost and so on. There are a lot of other benefits to effective transit. I was curious if any of you in your research have done studies on the economic benefits of attracting people to a region by having strong transit, because I moved here, I've lived all over the world, and I had to buy my first car at the age of 42, and I actually cried because I was so sad about it. And it's hard for me to advocate for other people to come here when we don't have a strong transit system. But I do believe there's a lot of potential. I was curious if you had the numbers behind it to prove that.
Great question. Okay. Someone who's mad at me.
I can start.
Okay.
Sorry. So we did an economic impact study. It's probably about 6 years old now. So it's pre-pandemic and therefore probably in need of an update. But at the time, we were able to show that for every dollar we are investing in the transit system here locally, we are generating about $4 of economic impact. So that is a strong case. That's a strong case, regardless of where you are at medium to larger size cities throughout the country, that investing in transit has a much larger impact locally on the economics for a variety of reasons. Yeah.
Oh, any question you have, Amy always has the answer. That's for sure. So I want to. I don't have really a number like $4 as Amy mentioned, but I think that we have done some work on looking into how to connect it, to connect people to jobs. I think this is very essential. Back a few years back, and I think we had a discussion with a big corporate. I don't want to disclose the name, but now But they built a very big warehouse in the airport corridor, and it turns out after that, and they couldn't really find anyone to go work for them, only because of the lack of transportation, or I should say lack of mobility options. I think that prompts a lot of questions and about more on just both sides, right? On the supply side, do we have enough of a transit system to support that workforce and support the accessibility to jobs and healthcare facilities? On the other hand, at the consumer side, how comfortable do they feel about using different options? Is the transit, is that they're one of the first options? I think it really comes down to two sides. Again, going back to my passion is about understanding system level impact. And if we lay over the system level where people live, what time, where they want to go, versus that's on the demand side and the supply side. If you have so many options in roadways, different options in transit and mobility options, microtransit, rails, and let's see how people's option might be. But of course, that's a long-term shot about research.
That's great. On that same note, I like to say is, what if they build it and no one could get there? I think there's oftentimes this sort of arrogance that you're going to build a factory, you're going to build a manufacturing site, and you're going to assume that everybody has reliable, affordable transportation, and that is not the case. So, yeah, good point. Question in the back.
Karen, in the tail end of your closing remarks, you mentioned maintenance and the workforce needed for it. I see that the workforce problem there being kind of in the opposite direction, because in my experience as an EV owner, owning a car since late 2015 that has had zero maintenance outside of tires, I'm wondering, as people talk about the huge cost of acquiring electric vehicles for private or public transit uses, is the relative lack of maintenance included in that calculus?
That's a great question, Erin, and thank you for that. And I'm hoping maybe, Erin could answer that.
It is in a calculus. I'll go back to that fueleconomy.gov website that has a cost to own calculator on it, and it will include those maintenance costs. But I will just be honest and say that this is a barrier with dealerships, because they make a lot of their money on, once they sell you a vehicle, on you bringing it back to get maintenance, repairs, even just simple oil changes. And you don't need that level of maintenance and repairs with an electric vehicle. It's true. There's a lot of data to support that. So it is that is a very real barrier with some dealerships not wanting to sell these vehicles, because they don't consider that, they consider them a loss. So that we have to find new paradigms and shift the way that we're thinking about selling those vehicles. Of course, though, the used vehicle market is, I think, is a really important linchpin to getting all levels of society into these vehicles. And one of the things I didn't mention before is that right now at the Department of Energy, we have the Justice 40 initiative that mandates that we strive to have 40% of the benefits from all of our funding, all of our projects, go toward historically disadvantaged communities, to benefit historically disadvantaged communities, and trying to help folks get into used EVs is one of the ways that we can do that. But it's not going to take away that we've got a lot of education to do with dealerships.
Great. Oh, yeah, Laura.
I just want to add one thing on that, because one of the things that Lacey does is we actually do workforce development training, and a lot of the problems that we see, especially in California with all the different chargers we have, is that you'll go to a charger and it will not work. And so we have a couple of different startups that actually work to provide rapid deployment of either formerly incarcerated individuals or low-income individuals, people from disadvantaged communities that we train up that may not have a 4-year degree, may have an associate's, may have some high school that they finished, and we have them go out and we teach them how to fix the the EVSE, if you will. And so we're actually building a site so that we can do more of this. And we had a all-women EVSE training that we did. And so we're looking forward to seeing Charger help expand and do more of this. So I feel like some of the maintenance that you do see is on the charger, not necessarily the car, but it's nice that the obsolescence is less in an electric vehicle.
That's a really great point. And I think it's like the whole system as well. Then you think about all the electrical, all that aspect, and it's become more automated. That's also going to need a different level of skill to maintain as well. Alan, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah. So on the reliability issue, I would definitely emphasize that that's probably one of the foremost concerns on a lot of current EV drivers, and then for potential future ones as well. So Rachel had mentioned that they have this new rule that basically says 97% uptime for chargers that are funded through the federal program, and that is, I think, a great first step towards improving reliability. But it doesn't sort of encompass everything, right? And so we've seen instances where chargers are blocked by, snow from snow plows, right? Even if they're technically up, right? We've seen instances where people have vandalized the chargers. They literally cut the cords. Technically, it's still on. So, from in some regards, you could still see a charger as working, even though literally no one could use it, right? And so right now, there's a lot of work in kind of understanding that charging experience and what constitutes reliability. Rachel mentioned that there's this ChargeX working group that's trying to understand that experience. We're working pretty closely with them. And actually on the California side, we've got this large project with the Energy Commission where we're literally sending out hundreds of undergrads out to chargers all over the state to try and assess reliability and charging experience holistically. And I can tell you there's like all sorts of, let's say, charging nightmares that are happening.
Yeah. This is good. Thank you, California, for leading the way in the charging nightmares. All right, we have a question here.
Hi, I was hoping, Amy, you could expand on the maintenance comment. I think it was maybe speciously raised up by Hertz as one of the reasons that they're selling off their Tesla fleet, that maintenance costs were actually higher and that loss rates were actually higher for EVs than, they just bought at the top, but whatever. So can you talk about your experience with the even just 8 buses on if total cost of ownership is trending, positive around maintenance, as obviously fuel sort of savings?
Yes. I'll note I am not the expert in this. What I can say is that I don't think have enough buses or enough time yet to really see what the sort of totality impact is going to be on our maintenance. We do project in our cost calculations less maintenance. So we do sort of take, standard calculations that are used by the industry when we're factoring in sort of what will our budget be for these buses when they come in. The bigger piece for us, I think, when it comes to, before I get to that, the articulated buses, the 60-foot battery electric buses, are still having challenges in the United States for operation. So those will be a pretty big test for us as well, not even so much from a maintenance perspective, but from a sort of uptime perspective with the weather we have here. We have extreme hot and extreme cold. We have extreme hills, and in Oakland, we have extreme loads. So we have very significantly crowded vehicles too. So those are all things that we are very eager to start looking at and investigating with that fleet. I think the broader piece to the question of maintenance and how does that factor into cost to the earlier woman's question too is, for us, we have an operating budget and a capital budget. Those are separate and they are funded separately and by separate mechanisms. So it is, yes, holistically, we may be paying significantly more upfront and having lower ongoing operating costs, but it's not quite so simple as something like your household budget having, although that's not simple either, having sort of this upfront cost and then over time this cost savings. It's complicated. The good news is it works well for grants because grants are usually capital, and so there are lots of opportunities for us, and we continue to advance those opportunities to look for that upfront capital cost increment, and hopefully at some point here we will start to see some operating cost savings from that maintenance.
Great. Thanks, Amy. We have time for just one more question.
Yes, thank you.
I'll make it fast. So the EU countries are much smaller than the United States, but I know that they're very far advanced in their way to electrification of buses. Is there anything that we can learn and leverage from how they've done scheduling to deploy over here?
Yes, there is, and there are several cities here in the States too that are much further along with their acquisition of battery electric in their fleet, especially on the West Coast. And we do belong to a collective benchmarking group of 24 transit agencies that we discuss this very directly with. And this has been a hot topic for the last few years of our annual workshop, talking about fleet transitions. So yes, I think there are plenty of places that we can look at to learn from the broader challenge of needing to find property and then purchase, own, design, construct, and then operate charging infrastructure on that property is a real challenge for us that we just need to start doing. It's a slow process for us. We have started it in some cases, but it is just a very large undertaking for us and is a reality of battery electric. I mentioned hydrogen as well. One of the reasons that some cities are continuing to look at and test out hydrogen solutions is because they are similar to diesel in their fueling needs. They do not have that scheduling constraint. So while we don't yet know if and how much hydrogen might be a part of our solution, because it has its own unique challenges as well with decarbonization, it could be a very real part of our transition solution as we move over time, because it is, in some cases, cleaner than diesel, but does not have those infrastructure hurdles.
All right. Thank you, Amy. And I'm hoping we have one really quick question.
Yes, just kidding. We have one lightning question.
I'm going to try to make it fast. We've been talking about infrastructure. I would love to know some pieces from you guys about the psychological connections to people using public transit, right? I grew up in a very car-centric place, Houston, Texas, moved here. Now I'm fully in transit. But what are those pieces? And then also what's the capacity that like the PRT has? But like, how do you encourage people to use transit? What are those behavioral factors that can get people to use it? Thank you.
All right, Lauren's going to take it.
So I'm gonna,
Houston native.
I'm going to really quickly say, go Cougs, University of Houston. So I'll say that also being from Texas, there's like a lot of pride around driving, but there is not a lot of pride around taking public transit, but public transit is not everywhere in Houston. We've done a significant amount of things there to like really build a rail and encourage people to take it and move people around for games. And that's like a lot of the work that we've done there. But when I lived in a city like New York, it's a very prideful thing to be like, everyone takes public transit. Yes. It's a beautiful day if you can take the bus because you have the time to look at the city sky and all of those things. And I think living in a city where it works really efficiently and you can get there faster than a car is really, or just as fast as a car, is what then also is a part of that mental capacity, what part of that takes over and says the psychology of this is that it's just as fast, it's just as good, or it's even better. Right. And then now that I live in LA, it's a little bit harder to do. So I can take the bus to the beach, but it's hard to take the bus to work because it's 4 times as long for me to take the bus to work.
Right. And then when you tore your Achilles.
And then I tore my Achilles. And I was like, I'm not going to get on the bus. I'm not running away from anyone. I'm not walking half a mile. So the accessibility piece as well, can public transit drop you off where you need to go? And if there's a mode shift need, is that mode shift need something that you can use? So if it's if it's an e-bike, if it's a scooter, does it work for you? Is walking the best option, or is it something like a Lyft? And so I think a lot of people want to be able to just take one specific type of transit and get where they're going. And mode shift is a little bit, you have to be a little bit more administrative and operational in your head in order to do that.
And we can do it, I guess, is the bottom line. So we're in the last home stretch minute. So I'm going to ask my panelists just like one word of wisdom that they want to impart with the audience. And I'm going to start with Erin, and then we're going to go down. All right, go for it, Erin.
One word of one?
Okay, one sentence of wisdom.
Okay. All right. We can do this. I've been doing this for 27 years. I have never experienced the amount of excitement, potential for change, available funding. The time is now. This is a great time to be doing this work.
Awesome. Sean.
Putting my researcher's hat on. I know all of you are coming from representing different sectors, representing different companies or schools, nonprofits. If you can contribute whatever you think the data can really help us to do a better research, especially understanding the system level impact. So the more data, the merrier.
Love it. Alan.
Yeah, I think so. You've been seeing a lot of probably pessimistic news about EVs recently. And I just want to say, I think we can do it. I think automakers and some companies have been complaining about these targets, and it's not new. They've been doing that for the last 10, 15 years, and time after time, we've been hitting targets, exceeding targets, and so don't worry too much about all that pessimistic news that you're seeing these days.
All right, Amy.
We will keep slowly moving toward our goal here. It may not be as fast as we are a government authority, and sometimes that's frustrating for us, but we'll keep moving forward. The best thing you can do in the interim while we shift is get out of your car and get on a bus, and a diesel bus even. And if you know of anyone who needs a job, we are looking for 200 bus operators.
All right, awesome. Lauren.
I would say lead with equity, and then also make sure that when you're thinking about implementing a policy, think about who's going to be the end recipient of it every single time, because that's going to either make or break how that goes.
Well, I mean, you heard it here. One last word, pitch for gondolas as the solution. Just think about it. But seriously, I think it is the time. It is now. We have fantastic expertise here. I think we have a break coming up. What's next?
Not right now.
Okay, after the break, we'll talk. But let's take a round of applause for our awesome panelists. Thank you.